One of the most common ways people break in is stealing a username and password. And that once you steal those credentials, you can become that person. So, and that's where somebody like Akamai, we have a product that says, Steve Winterfeld's logging in, but it's a new machine, it's a new location, it's a different time than normal. We're not sure this is Steve, so we're going to have him do a second validation.
This is your Sapnil Bhartiya, and welcome to another episode of CISO Insight. And today we have with us, as usual, once again, Steve Winterfeld, Advisory CISO at Akamai. Steve, it's great to have you back on the show.
It's been a great year and a great series with you. I'm excited about today's topic.
Yeah, this is the last episode of this year. And today we are going to talk about how to build a great security culture. As you often say, the culture can eat its strategy for lunch, breakfast, and dinner. So culture does play a big role. Before we talk about, building a great security culture, let's talk about what is the role of culture when it comes to security. We can have all the tools, we can have all the technologies, but as we say, you can bring a horse to the lake, but you cannot make it drink. So talk about the importance of culture when it comes to security.
So, it is true. One of my favorite taglines is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But the corollary to that is a strong security culture eats social engineering for breakfast. And that's really what we want to drive here is, the one is kind of aimed at transformation and innovation and things like that. But today we want to talk about how important it is that your people think about the risk that they're introducing to the company as they're doing their day-to-day job. So as you're talking about your customer, I worked at Nordstrom. They have a customer first culture. I've worked at Charles Schwab, and they have, that culture of making sure they're taking care of the investor and that business model of security and maintaining the trust. Here at Akamai, I love that we have a culture of innovation and solving the next hard problem. In fact, Akamai, was founded out of an innovation competition at MIT. So all of these have strong cultures. And what I love about that is you can build on that. When you talk about a customer first culture, you can say customer first, but what do? We have to take care of the customer. So we have to be secure. It is not about, I took my hour of annual security training and I managed to do that in 5 minutes. It is, not about publishing a motto. It's really about that how people think every day when they see a phishing email. Do they notice it? Do they report it? Those kind of things. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and thank you for that. Now, can you also talk about, of course, you work closely with a lot of companies. Are you seeing that companies are really building this kind of culture, or it's like the reality is different from what we wish?
I think everybody has a goal. I talk to some customers and we collaborate on how to build security champions within different, departments. Others are trying to talk about, a specific skill set. How do you do security training? And whenever I hear somebody talk about security training, I have a feeling they probably don't have a security culture because they don't talk about, the attitude, making people aware. One of the best ways I've always found to do security training is say, hey, the Christmas holidays are coming up. We're going to give a class on how you can train your loved ones to stay safe online. Guess who shows up for that training? Everybody. Guess who's paying attention? Everybody. And now they're going to go train their family. What does that do? That brings in now that ownership. I'm a security trainer. I'm the one that's making sure my family's secure. And in my brain, I'm hoping that translates to how they operate at work. It doesn't always, but those kind of thoughts, You see other people try to do gamification, that, hey, we're going to have a hackathon. We're going to take everybody through a security training internally so you can see how the threat operates, and then you can be more aware of how they're attacking you and be more defensive. These are the kinds of things that I really like to see, where you're going beyond that annual training to continuous training and trying to make it an attitude.
I would also like to talk about that, as we discussed, that yes, everybody wants to build a culture. What is the right approach to build correct security culture within an organization?
Whenever I'm a process person. I like, frameworks. One of the things I always think about is there are three parts to this. There's the people, the technology, and the processes. If you do one of those poorly, you are not going to be secure. So when we talk about culture, I think that's a great tool to bring forward. So far I've been talking mostly about securing the people, securing their attitudes, getting them to kind of take a risk forward approach of, I don't want them to say no. I don't want them not to click on emails. I want them to stop and say, should I be getting this email from this person? Does this feel genuine? Social engineering, we hear about all these business email compromise, GenAI making it easier, deep fake videos. This is getting more and more dangerous. And I'm going to be more and more dependent on my people. But the second part is a process. If I see something suspicious, do I know how to report it? Once I report it, is there a process then to push that lesson learned out to others? Is there a process to reward that person, or if your culture is a shame culture, to shame the people that perform poorly, in a public way to reinforce those individual acts? Is there a policy in place that if someone is grossly negligent, they are held accountable, and in some cases, drastic action is taken? And then last, what you talked about is you need to reinforce this with technology. But this is where I struggle. So if I worked for you and you monitored me, you told me that you would delete my phone if I quit, you called and asked why I received a text from somebody. At some point, I feel like you're treating me like a criminal. That's not a great culture. You would never do that. But I also, if I have somebody leaving, I don't want them to take proprietary data. If I have a salesperson leaving, I don't want them to take my customer data and try to steal my customers. So there's this balance here of not treating people like a criminal, but finding and stopping those that do act like a criminal.
Let's talk about people, process, and tech. What is the key drive? Because sometimes, Akamai is a great example. Sometimes right tools and right technologies can become the catalyst to bring the cultural change, because the tools will enforce you to work in a certain way, and same times right culture can also help in getting best out of tech.
Yeah, and there is that balance. One of the most common ways people break in is stealing a username and password, and that once you steal those credentials, you can become that person. So, and that's where somebody like Akamai, we have a product that says, Steve Winterfeld's logging in, but it's a new machine, it's a new location, it's a different time than normal. We're not sure this is Steve, so we're going to have him do a second validation. And if I was on vacation and all those things were unique for a reason, I could still get in. But if somebody had stolen my credentials, then yeah. Akamai offers multi-factor authentication. Again, as you said, a great tool to prevent it. So not only something I know, but something I have. My phone with clicking that, yeah, this is me. And passwords are becoming more and more useless over time. So that multi-factor authentication is so critical. And it does kind of force those things. There's other things like segmentation, where should Steve be able to get to the HR system? I'd be making more money if I could, so probably not. I think that's probably the biggest part of it is, you want to reinforce that. But again, the monitoring side is where it becomes a little bit more interesting. What freedom do you allow them? Can they download software on their laptop? I think that's very risky, but some cultures say, well, no, we want them to innovate. We want them to bring down stuff, try it. If it works, push it out for the company. So that's the balance that people have to think through.
Where should the buck stop? Of course, security teams, they do their job, but should employees also be held accountable now? As you also earlier mentioned that, employees, they don't feel comfortable if they get a feeling of being interrogated, but they should also be aware that they are responsible, accountable for their own actions. So if they don't follow the processes properly and if something goes wrong, they will be held accountable. But because of this accountability, this should not disrupt innovation. It should not disrupt. So that's why we talk a lot about building guardrails versus gates. So they can freely play within those guardrails, but they are also accountable. Does that make sense?
It does. I love the old analogy, the stick or the carrot, which is the best way to get the donkey to move. I think you need both. I think you should reward positive behavior, publicly praise people that have done a good job. But if you have somebody who, let's say they failed phishing 3 times, but you believe that that's just who they are, they're not malicious, they don't have poor security practices, maybe you work with that person. Maybe you try to figure out a different training methodology to bring them forward. If there's somebody else that just displays an attitude of they don't care about security, I'm just going to write the code I'm going to write. I'm just going to do the job the way I want to do my job. You figure out security, that's not my job. That person, I think, should be held accountable because they're taking unacceptable risks. So for me, it comes down to more of a nuanced judgment where I'm saying, okay, not only, how they're performing, but where they're coming from. That one bad apple can, spoil the entire barrel. And so if you see somebody that has, he's going to set the example that, oh, well, then I don't have to do it because XYZ didn't do it.
Also, when companies are building these cultures and practices, is it something that they create a document, they wrote some handbooks, and it's done? Or it is a continuous process, continuous improvement? Of course, new folks will come, old folks will move out. So that retraining is always part of the process that companies have, orientation and all those things happen. But new technologies keep coming in, new social engineering, how exploits are happening. So once again, security, well, we all discuss, is more of a journey, not a destination. Is culture also similar? Or once you have set in a culture, you're like, oh no, we have a document in place, it's done, or it's a continuous process?
So I think culture is driven by a couple things. One, it's driven by the senior leadership's behaviors. So if you have a change of senior leadership, they may try to drive a new culture. The other part is cultures shift over time. If I was in one company and suddenly we had a huge influx of people from Amazon, and you could feel that Amazon culture, they wanted to bring that into ours. And there was this brief conflict, and obviously they didn't change our entire culture, but they did influence. They did shift our culture a little bit, where we're like, oh, I kind of like those best practices. We'll kind of move in that direction. And again, some of those were processes, some of those were tools that they brought in, but a lot of it was that attitude, behavior of, how we work, which method we use. A typical example of, I've been around companies that are, we build everything we use. I've been around other companies that are the polar opposite of, we buy everything we use and focus just on our business, not on technology. And so those cultures shift over time for sure. Where the security people have to be careful is they're staying on top of that and continuing to develop and modify it to be where they want.
Since we are talking about culture, and one piece of technologies that is finding way in almost every aspect of our lives, and I hope you guess what I'm talking about, GenAI. With GenAI, what is happening is with prompt. I mean, you and I, we use GenAI a lot for writing. I use it a lot for a lot of basic mundane tasks and everything like that. And with GenAI, a lot of companies, they also felt there are some biases there. There are risks there. Now, the risk is also to expose company IP, company information, but it's also a lot more than that. But the way it is finding its way, how do you look at it affecting the whole culture within companies, and how companies should prepare so that they only reap benefits, but they don't get hit by all the negativity that comes with GenAI? How they should look at GenAI when they are building these cultures?
So I love that you asked me a question that's a 1 hour show on its own. So I'll try to put a quick wrap around this. When I think about Gen AI from a security point of view, I think of three things. How do I make sure my employees use it securely? If I have my own Gen AI model, a private model with my data in it, how do I protect my model, and how are the criminals using it? And already we see things like Worm GPT or Fraud GPT, where there are malicious AI models out there. We see jailbreaking in the positive ones. So in this answer, I'm going to focus on how to protect the employees. First of all, we need to build their skills. We need to say, hey, listen, when you go in, you want to set your configurations to not include your queries in the training data. That way, if you accidentally expose some of our IP, it won't be included in the actual model that other people could pull out. You want to think about the fact that everything you're doing is training that model. So are you doing things in a risk appropriate way? Don't think that, oh, I'm putting one little dot of information into this huge database. If what you put in is used and then reused and people keep doing it, it's going to grow and affect the model. So a lot of this is around taking a careful approach to when you use it, remembering what you pull out of that is probably has some errors in it. Not all of this is true. I tend to use the models that tell me where they pulled data from. Because again, one of the risks to my employees is, let's take the famous lawyer example. A lawyer used ChatGPT to prepare a brief, went in, gave it to the judge, and some of the cases cited were completely made up, hallucinations by the ChatGPT. So we don't want those kind of things as well. As the last thing I'll say is, a lot of my employees are worried that Gen AI are going to replace them. So we need to work with them and say, this is where your skill sets are today. This is where your skill sets need to be in the future, so you still have a job in the industry. There are some jobs that will go away with Gen AI, and some jobs will become created. And we need to help our employees understand that.
Steve, once again, thank you so much for another great episode of CISO Insights. This is end of the year, so this is a wrap for the year as well. And I look forward to getting you back on the show next year. Thank you.
Thanks. Have great holidays, everybody.